Preseason rankings and metrics are now slowly coming out for the upcoming basketball season. And I'm here to tell you why our most overlooked player might end up being our highest scorer.
You are Locked On Illini, your daily podcast on the Illinois Fighting Illini. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Illini. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Simple reminder, we are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Sunny Verma. You can find me at IlliniCast or at the Sunny V. If you'd like to support the channel, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It costs you guys nothing. And if you really want to help the channel out, find me on your favorite audio platform and also subscribe to us there. Today's going to be a fun episode. I'm going to be talking about the Bart Torvik rankings, which came out late last week. And there's a couple guys out there whose numbers and projections just simply do not make any sense for me. And also it's Tuesday. And so Tuesdays mean Big Ten Ted. So we'll have Ted on. And today we're going to be talking about the Illini defense and also rank the Big Ten defenses for this upcoming season. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Speaking of getting started, so the Bart Torvik, I think I called him Bart Torvik in the opener. My apologies to Bart. The Bart Torvik initial metric rankings have come out, and they have the Illini roster set currently as the number 20 team in the upcoming basketball season. And if I'm going to be honest, 20 seems just about right. If I were to come up with my own rankings, which as we get closer to the season, I will, I would have put Illinois somewhere in the 20 to 25 range, at least at the beginning of the season. I think we're incredibly talented, but we're incredibly young. And I just don't know if that talent is going to gel right away and be ready to go up against that tough out of conference schedule that I've referred to plenty of times. But what I found most interesting was some of the projections for the individual players, which Torvik does. And so I'm just going to go one by one through all the players, and I can talk about my feelings on each. So they have our leading scorer on next year's team being Kylan Boswell. Kylan, they have averaging 14 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 3 assists a game. If I were to guess right now, Kylan, if he averages 14 points, I think our team is in very, very good shape. I've talked about this before. I think one of the X factors on the upcoming season is going to be Kylan's adjustment to Illinois and the Big Ten in general. Obviously, he had some issues at Arizona, and as glad as we are to have him back home in Champaign, there's a lot of Arizona fans who weren't exactly crying to see him leave. So Kylan, if he puts up a 14, 3.5, 3 stat line, I think Illinois fans will be very, very happy. They actually have Ty Rodgers as our second leading scorer at 13 and also 7 rebounds. If Ty gives us 13 and 7, again, that'd be an ideal situation for us. For me, anything around double figures for Ty Rodgers is good enough because of just how outstanding he is at every other facet of basketball. Will Riley, they have as our third leading scorer, coming in at 11 points per game, 11, 6 rebounds, and 1.5 assists. Will Riley, now actually, believe it or not, I think 11 is about right. A lot of people out there are going to agree. They're going to think that 11 is a little low for a 5-star, but compared to two of the guys I'm going to be talking about later, and let's be honest, you probably are wondering right now, after I've named our top 3 scorers, where at least one of the guys is. And there's another one who I think is being extremely overlooked. I think Will Riley at about 11 points per game is maybe where he's going to be at. If I had to guess myself right now on a mid-August summer, I'd project him to be right around the 10 to 15 range. And that's, before obviously camp has started and I get more feedback from the people who are watching him every single day. After Will Riley, we have Morez Johnson at 9.9. So basically 10 points, 6 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. Now, on yesterday's episode, I had Muhammad say that what I think a lot of people are thinking, that I might be underrating Morez Johnson's offense. And maybe that's the case. I could be wrong. I did watch him in high school. And, I understand he scored something like 16, 17 points per game in high school, but so did Ty Rogers. Ty Rogers scored 15 points per game in high school as well. Morez Johnson right now at the high school level is simply just better than everybody. He's not really a guy who is using his offensive arsenal to hit that double-figure points on a weekly basis. That's not going to happen at the college basketball level. At the college basketball level, there's going to be some growing pains, but if Torvik has him at 9.9, and if he ends up at 9.9, I would gladly be wrong. Trey White is up next at 8.5 points per game. Now, Trey White, I've also talked about plenty. He's one of the more experienced players on this team. He's going to be a junior, having played for USC and Louisville last year. I'm telling you, the insiders, the people around the staff, the people who've been watching these offseason workouts, they really like Trey White and think that he's going to be one of our better role players. And finally, at fifth, our fifth highest scorer, they have Kasparas Jakushonis. 7 points per game, 3.5 rebounds, 1.5 assists. I would be shocked if these numbers were this low for Kasparas. I don't know if the Torvik rankings just don't translate offshore stats all that well. That's really the only explanation I can think of. Because if Kasparas is averaging 20 plus points in all these tournaments overseas over the past summer, I would be shocked if he averaged single digits in his freshman year. Now, again, I've talked about how I do think we need to pump the brakes a little bit when it comes to, some outlets out there already projecting all Big Ten status for Kasparas. I think I love him. Okay, again, I was one of the first in the Illini media circle to anoint him, as I like to call it, calling him my guy, I think just 3 weeks into this Locked On Illini. But at the same time, I want to temper my enthusiasm and be honest with you in the sense where I don't want to set up projections of him coming right in, averaging 20 points per game, being a top 5 overall pick. I think he's going to be in contention for freshman of the year in the Big Ten, and he should be a lock for the freshman all Big Ten team unless something bad happened. But all Big Ten, probably not quite. But also 7 points per game, also not likely. I actually, if I'm going to say it, I think he might be closer to becoming an all Big Ten honorable mention than he is to hit just 7 points in a season. And the next one is the guy who I'm most floored by. And if you're following along, obviously now I'm talking about Ben Hummerkaus, who Torvik has with 5 points per game, 2.7 rebounds, and just under 1 assist a game. Now, early on in Locked On Illini, I wanted to make a super early prediction on who the high scorer on next year's basketball team was going to be. And obviously, this was before Will Riley signed on, and honestly, this was before Kasparas signed on. But I actually anointed at that point Ben Hummerkaus as my projected high scorer of next year's team. Now, I'm not saying I'm sitting here 100% changing that prediction right now. Again, I'm going to wait a little bit closer to the season once I get feedback from people closer to Champaign and who are kind of following the team a little bit more. But at 5 points per game, I think at minimum he's going to average almost 3 times that. I do think Hummerkaus, whether he may or may not be our leading scorer, is going to be one of the top 2 or 3. Ironically enough, I think our top 2 scorers might be the last 2 guys I just mentioned. Kasparas, who Torvik has projected for 7 points per game, and Hummerkaus, who Torvik has projected for just 5 points per game. I think people are just severely overlooking Ben's just all-around offensive game. Sure, on the defensive side, some teams are going to be able to take advantage of his lack of lateral speed, but on offense, keep in mind he's the most accomplished senior player on the team next year, and he's going to be a guy that we're going to be counting on a lot, especially in the high intense, high pressure situations. Ben's ability to shoot threes, Ben's ability to really score on all 3 levels is going to be utilized perfectly by a guy like Kasparas Jakushonis handling the ball. And I can't say it enough. I think Ben is going to be a top 2, top 3 scorer on our team, and easily he's become the most overlooked player on next year's Illini ballot. Let me know your thoughts. Am I wrong? Am I overhyping Ben Hummerkaus? I highly doubt anyone out there is going to disagree with my Kasparov take. I think a lot of us have gotten pretty hyped up about what we've seen about from KJ. So, but Ben Hummerkaus, maybe is he just going to be a role player? Because that seems to be what Torvik is kind of suggesting to us. I think he's a lock for our starting power forward position. But if Morez Johnson is averaging those points and Ben Hummerkaus is only averaging 5, is it a story of Morez overtaking Hummerkaus and playing the 4? Who knows? Again, I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know which stats you like and which projections you think are off. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone, every day, all summer long. So head on over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, as I said in the opener, it's Tuesday. That means I bring back my good friend, Ted from Big Ten Ted on the YouTube channel. Ted, welcome back.
Oh, it's good to be here. Good to be here. Good to be talking defense in what might be the conference of defense. We are stacked. We are loaded. I know we're going to talk Illini first, but there's a lot of good defensive talk certainly to get to.
I can't share your enthusiasm talking about defense just because you'll see once we start talking about the Illini on that side of the defense. But let's go ahead and let's just get started, Ted. Who do you think are kind of the stronger rooms or the playmakers that you think are going to stand out?
Well, first of all, when you kind of rewind back to last year's defense, of course, it dropped off from the year before, which was fantastic. Yeah. One of the best defenses in the country, coordinated by now Purdue head coach Ryan Walters. It was the defensive line up front with Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph last year. Keith kind of fell off a little bit last year, but Johnny, of course, maybe started a little bit slow. But once he got going, he was a matchup nightmare on the inside for opposing offensive lines. But now you look to that defensive line and they don't have a game wrecker like a Johnny Newton up front. Now, Dennis Briggs Jr. coming over from Florida State is a guy that this coaching staff is very high on, but once again, a transfer. He's played has a lot of years under his belt. That's always that can be very hit or miss, right? We've seen not only in this conference, but throughout all of college football, when you take these guys, when you take them from one football culture to another, sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. That's the crapshoot that is the transfer portal as well. Tara Edwards, formerly of Northwestern, is in there as well. Like, there's a lot of just new blood in the middle. We just don't know what this defensive line. So I kind of push them off to the side in terms of your best groups, but you kind of go back to this next group. And this linebacking group, I think, is really, really good. Of course, Gabe Akis and Seth Coleman are very, very good on the inside. And they've been in this program now for a few years. You look at Gabe, and Gabe is kind of that guy that can he's a bigger guy, so he can kind of line up on the edge of that defensive line as well. So he can kind of be that hybrid type as well. And then you got Seth Coleman, who's compiled some good tackle numbers over the years as well at linebacker. You move back to the secondary, and that was an area that really struggled last season. The health of Matthew Bailey was a big reason why, or the lack of health, should I say, of Matthew Bailey not being back there. There were a lot of teams that could throw the ball all over the yard against Illinois. And when you look at this team this year, is Bailey healthy? Is he ready to go? If so, that is going to be a boost. You've got Xavier Scott. You've got Miles Scott. Like, you've got some guys back there. But then when you look at this 18-team Big Ten as a whole, I'm not sure if this is the top half of the Big Ten secondary right now when you compare it to everybody else in the conference. So because of all of that, I think I take the linebackers as the strengths of this defense. And then you kind of break things down. This defensive line, can they get pressure? Because if you don't have a secondary that's top half of the Big Ten, and that can cover great, and you don't have a pass rush, boy, passing games are just licking their chops going up against you. So, but we've seen Bret Bielema in these types of situations before where we maybe start to doubt him a little bit. Like I'm going through my game by game predictions. I'm like, Ted, don't do it. Don't doubt Bert. He always, when you kind of sleep on him a little bit, that's when he kind of springs back up. So there's pieces on this Illinois team, but I think there are a fair amount of question marks on the defensive side of the football. If they can generate a pass rush, if somebody steps up on that defensive line, hey, maybe that can take a little bit of heat off of the secondary as well. So that's the big thing for me, generating pressure. If Illinois can generate pressure, it's going to have that cause and effect to help out the secondary, and it's going to help everybody out. But if they can't do that, if they can't generate that pass rush, some of these passing teams that they face off with this season might be able to move the football against them.
Yeah, and you brought up one of the key players, speaking of that defensive line. Briggs Jr., I think, is a guy you just kind of – it's a necessity to keep him healthy. As you said, he's played many years in college football already, but a lot of that is due to him getting injured, honestly, like quite often. So at this point, you keep Briggs, especially with the way Bret has been talking about him during this offseason. He's performing very, very well during these training camps. And so when I think about the defense, like, it really is going to be the deciding factor on whether we end up hitting the over or the under. If the defense plays to the best of its abilities, you're talking about maybe a top 9, top 10, middle 10 Big Ten defense, but which is okay because I actually am. We talked about this last week. I'm actually genuinely excited about the offensive side of the football. So if we can pair that offensive side of football, which I think has the potential to be a top 6, top 7 team in the conference, with just an average team on the defensive side, then we should have no problem hitting that 6-win magic mark that Bret absolutely has to hit this year.
Yeah, I talked about that actually today when talking about the Cole Rusk injury on offense. What's going to be the impact? What's going to be the effect of Illinois? And I think that that's minus a downfield passing threat for the Illini. So I think they're going to get back to Barry Ball pre-Wisconsin 2006. Bret Bielema was a part of that as the defensive coordinator. Like when I look at this offensive line, that's a pretty good offensive line for Illinois. Mm-hmm. When I look at the run game, Caden Fagan, like this is a team that can pound the rock if they can keep their defense fresh, if they can dominate the time of possession, dominate the line of scrimmage. Maybe that's a mixture that could come together and get Illinois to bowl eligibility.
Exactly. When you kind of take a look at things from the big picture, this is really built to be a typical Bret Bielema team.
Yep.
Right after this, we'll talk about the rest of the Big Ten defense, and we'll find out who Ted ranks in his top 5-ish. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. All right, Ted, that's enough Illini. I'm sure there's a lot better defenses out there in the conference to talk about. Why don't you start with the cream of the crop?
Well, yeah, I look at two defenses right off the top, and it's ho-hum. It's Michigan and Ohio State, right? These two teams have dominated the conference for a while now, maybe the past decade or so, really ever since Michigan State had that run in the early 2010s. It's been the Buckeyes and it's been the Wolverines. And when I look at both of these defense, like so many guys, I talked in my Ohio State season preview with Dan Hope of 11 Warriors, and he listed off guys that could have gone pro. You look at the Jack Sawyers, the JT Tuimoloau's, you look at some of these guys on the back end, even of that defense in the secondary that could have gone pro, like so many great players. And then they decide to run it back one more season. Like, even before Nick Saban retired, this was already one of the best defenses in the country. And then, I don't know, you just add Caleb Downs, who might be one of the best players in college football, regardless of whether they're on the offensive or defensive side of the football. So Ohio State is certainly up there. When I look at really good Big Ten defenses, I always look to the defensive line. This is everybody always says the Big Ten is that conference that you got to be good in the trenches. I just think that's college football. Like, look at what Georgia was in the SEC. They were built really well on the offensive and defensive line. And when I look at the defensive line, Michigan, man, they might be the best. They have the best interior combination with Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant in the middle there. And then you look at the outside. You look at Josiah Stewart on one side at that edge rusher as well. I'm drawing a blank on who the other edge rusher is, but I'll maybe get there eventually. But the front four on this year's team, the front four this season was the front four that was on that play that stuffed Jalen Milroe in the Rose Bowl against Alabama, right? So they're in pretty good company right up front there for Michigan. And then you look back to the secondary, one of the best defensive backs in the country with Will Johnson over there at corner, Quentin Johnson at safety, Makari Page. Now they lost Rod Moore at safety, but they got a Big Ten honorable mention safeties for Michigan State, Jaden Mangum, kind of coming over to one of the rivals over to Ann Arbor, Michigan. Like, they loaded up in the secondary. They're very good back there. And then you look at linebacker, right? Where you look at some guys that went on to the National Football League, the Michael Barretts and the Junior Colsons of the world, and you replace them with Jayshon Barham, who is Maryland's best defensive player, probably for the last 2 years, even when he stepped onto campus as a 4-star freshman. And then Ernest Hausman. Okay, he was at Nebraska as a freshman a couple of years back, had really promising towards the second half of that season. He transferred to Michigan, and he kind of sat behind some of these guys a little bit, learned. And now he's going to step up into that role. Those are two really good linebackers up front. And then there's guys, the Rashawn Berries, that are in that second tier of defensive linemen up there. There's really good players all across this defense, for that narrative that says, hey, Michigan lost everything. I look at this defense and I'm like, okay. They're still pretty darn good. I still think that they're one of the best defenses in the country. Like, these are at the bare minimum, two of the top 5 defenses in the country.
Yeah, Michigan at this point, they don't lose. They just reload. Let's just talk about maybe the next tier down. Ohio State, Michigan, ho-hum, as you said. But who are some of the other teams on defensive side of football that might be out there dominating?
It's kind of tough to where exactly to draw the line, but I've got a handful of teams. I'll go with 4 here, I think. Penn State, Oregon, Iowa, Nebraska is, I think, my next grouping of teams. Now, you look at Penn State, and we talked about some of these defensive line combinations. They might have the best edge rushing combination in the Big Ten, if not all of college football. Abdul Carter was an all-conference linebacker. He moves down to the edge rusher spot alongside Dennis Sutton, right? You had Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac last year. Well, it's just another Penn State defensive line combination, and that's going to be one of the best. Trust me, that's going to be one of the best edge rushing combinations. It's going to be tough. It's going to be extremely tough for Big Ten offensive tackles to be able to contain these guys as well. They feel pretty good about their linebackers. Tony Rojas was a 4-star guy. Dominic DeLuca, like Kobe King, of course, was in the rotation last year. So in order to move an all-conference linebacker and Abdul Carter to the defensive line, you got to feel pretty confident about your linebacker group. And come on, it's Penn State. It's linebacker you. So the questions for me are going to be the secondary, right? When you lose a Johnny Dixon, when you lose a Kalen King, when you lose a Daquan Hardy, right? That was a really good secondary last year. Now they went out and got some transfers from the SEC, Jalen Kimber coming over from Florida, among some other guys that are going to be able to step in there and make a difference right away. So, this is still a good secondary. This is still a really good defense. Is it that top 5, top 3 Penn State defense from last year? Probably not. Kevin Winston, I talked to Zach Seiko from Locked On Illini Lions, and he's saying Kevin Winston back there at safety, despite Danny Dennison, despite Abdul Carter, he might be the best player on this Penn State defense. So they certainly still do have some personnel on the back end of that defense. I look at this Oregon Ducks team, Dan Lanning, of course, defensive side of the ball. He coordinated that great 2021 Georgia defense. What they added up front, Derek Harmon coming over from Michigan State. They added Jamari Caldwell from Houston. They added some Big Ten beef in the middle of that defensive line. They got better, I think, in the secondary as well, bringing over Jabbar Muhammad, a first-team All-Pac-12 corner from last year. Arch rival Washington, he's coming over there at Oregon. Cam Alexander from UTSA, highly graded. Kobe Savage from Kansas State. Like, they've done a really good job. And then you look at the middle at linebacker, Justin Jacobs, a former Iowa Hawkeye. Jeffrey Bassa was up there in terms of tackles for the Ducks last season. There's a lot of athleticism. But now they're expecting, and I think this goes for some personnel on the offensive side of the football for the Ducks too, they're expecting some of these players that Dan Lanning has recruited to really step up into bigger roles. They're really looking at Mateo Uiagalelei to come off the edge and really take that next big step. You got Jordan Birch up front on the defensive line as well. This is a very, very dynamic defense. They line up very differently, right? There's some defenses across the Big Ten and across college football. You can't call them a 4-2-5, 4-3-3-4. They line up different every single time. Oregon is kind of one of those defenses over there that's going to confuse you. There's nothing confusing about Iowa and Nebraska, right? It's pretty straight up type of defense. Of course, with Iowa, with that 4-man front, this is a defensive line that, I mentioned the JTTs, the Jack Sawyers, the Mason Grahams. I mentioned the Jordan Birch at Oregon and Carter at Penn State. Some of these standout defensive linemen. Iowa just has 4 really, really good defensive linemen up front. You look at Deontay Craig, you look at Aaron Graves, you look at Y.A. Black, you look at Ethan Herkett, you look at a lot of these guys up front, and they're just really, really good, and they're just really, really consistent. And they have the best linebacker, maybe the 2 best linebackers in all of college football in Iowa City, of course, with Jay Higgins and Nick Jackson up there. And then you look into the secondary. It's just, man, they just reload. It's crazy how Phil Parker's team does it year after year after year. All reliable Quinn Schulte and Xavier Nwapka over there right next to him. I expect him to really step up into a bigger role. And Sebastian Castro at that cash position, man, he is fun to watch play the game of football. He's, from Riley Moss to Cooper DeJean to Sebastian Castro. It just seems like they continuously pump them out, and they have built a culture of defense over there. No question about that. Nebraska, this is a fun team that and a very experienced team, like a lot of 4th-year, a lot of 5th-year guys on this defense. Ty Robinson and the Polar Bear, Nash, Hutmaker up front. He's really developed into a tough matchup in the middle at defensive line as well. So lots of experience on the back end. Can that experience turn into all conference players on defense for the Huskers? We'll see. But Tony White did a tremendous job turning it around last year. We'll see if that can continue this season. I mentioned those guys, and then you still got Rutgers out there that returns just about everybody. Max Melton is a Green Bay Packer, but pretty much everybody else is back for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Really good defense. Maryland is a defense that nobody should sleep on. This is probably the best defense of the Mike Locksley era. Hearing a lot of good things about the Wisconsin linebackers at camp. And then you look at Hunter Wohler, one of the best safeties in the game back there, Ricardo Holman, who had about 6 interceptions last year. So I could keep on going on and on, man. There's a lot of good defenses. And last thing I'll say, Minnesota and Northwestern, some good defensive fronts. John Joyner and Danny Strigal for the Golden Gophers coming off the edge. That's a good, maybe a little bit of an underrated pass rush combination up there. Northwestern has a good front. Guys like Jalen Pate and Aiden Hubbard and Richie Haggerty. They got to find a way to replace Bryce Gallagher. Xander Mueller comes in there at linebacker. They lose 2 key pieces in the secondary. So, there's going to be defenses this year in the Big Ten that are 7th, 8th, and they could be top 30 in the country. That's how deep this conference is on the defensive side of the ball. I can't wait. There's probably going to be defenses that are 9th or 10th that might be top 50 that are still pretty good compared to maybe some 9th or 10th ranked defenses in other conferences.
And this is why you're the best in the world, Ted. Ted, let us know what's going on the Big Ten Ted channel.
Oh boy, things are ramping up because the season is so close. So close. Very excited to be launching a Tuesday and Thursday weekly show called Big Nation here coming up. That will premiere on August 20th. So looking forward to that. That'll be on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights. But coming up this week, before that happens, coming up this week, I'm going to talk about the 5 biggest non-conference games in the Big Ten. Boy, for as excited as we are about that 9-game conference schedule, there's some really good non-conference games as well in there. So it's an exciting time. Very excited about the coverage. And summer can just, kind of get out of here. We're ready for ball. We're ready for the fall to begin, no doubt.
16 more days for the Illini kickoff. I can't wait. Ted, thank you so much. We'll see you next week.
All right, good stuff.
Thank you for making Locked On Illini your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, please enjoy the Locked On College Football Podcast. Spencer McLaughlin gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion on the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new college football expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube and whatever gets you podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And there you have it, another episode of Locked On Illini. Thank you all so much for tuning in, especially for those of you on the YouTube side. I know the lighting isn't quite there yet. I'm going to be working on my office space Wednesday, I promise. And hopefully things will start looking up after that. If you want to help support the channel, please, all I ask is maybe hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, or send this to, some of your Illini friends. I think we're at like 992 subs as of this recording, only 7 away from that magical 1,000 mark. So this could be the week with a little help from you guys. We got an action-packed rest of the week, which I'm looking forward to. A couple stories I've already circled that I'm looking forward to talk about. But if there's something in particular you want me to talk about, please let me know in the chat. This isn't my show. This is your show. And I want to basically, if I am going to be the only guy out here giving you Illini content daily, I want to make sure I'm giving you guys the content that you want daily. So until tomorrow, ILL, love you guys.